It's a pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Courtney Parkerson. As Megan mentioned, I'm the Director of Early Childhood Education and Care at the Connecticut Project. The Connecticut Project is an organization that mobilizes people, partners, and resources around agendas that advance positive outcomes for low-income families throughout the state of Connecticut. Specifically, we focus on economic opportunity, childcare, and housing, and we leverage three main actions to accomplish our mission: investment, alignment, and advocacy. And we're honored to say that the New Britain Childcare Business Incubator was our first investment in our childcare strategy in 2022. Tracy, did you want to say a quick hello?
Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy Madden Hennessy, CEO for YWCA New Britain. Happy to be here. Either good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're watching this from. And the YWCA is located in central Connecticut in New Britain. And I'll talk more about that, but I'll leave the rest for the presentation.
Great. Do you want to go to the next slide, Tracy? Actually, I think maybe two ahead.
Okay, perfect.
Actually, one more.
One more. There we go.
There we go. Excellent. So I'm going to start out speaking at a very high level about the program elements of childcare incubators in Connecticut. And then I'll pass it over to Tracy, who will go into much greater detail about what this specifically looks like in the city of New Britain. So at a high level, the goal of childcare business incubators is to establish a sustainable pipeline of new, high-quality, affordable childcare programs to address the unmet need of childcare slots that we have in the state of Connecticut. And like most states throughout the country, our unmet need mostly falls within the infant toddler space. Childcare incubators create opportunity to access various forms of support in one place to early childhood educators that are interested in entering the field. So in Connecticut, this includes paid training in child development, curriculum, licensing regulations, and small business development. It includes support launching a business, so things like creating an LLC, getting insurance, obtaining all necessary permits and licenses. For several educators that participate in the training cohort, it also includes access to low or no cost space for the first few years of operation. So Tracy will describe in greater detail what that looks like in New Britain, but the approach that we've taken in Connecticut is identifying space within a common facility that can house multiple childcare businesses under one roof. Creating access to this space offers financial benefits as businesses are just getting off the ground and programs are working hard to fully enroll children. The incubator also provides access to ongoing coaching and a built-in network of support from other providers that are also operating out of the same building. Our approach to licensing childcare businesses in Connecticut is such that each individual business obtains a license as a family childcare program. So in Connecticut, that means up to 6 children or up to 9 children with an assistant. And there are some modifications that our Office of Early Childhood have applied to family childcare licensing to enable them to operate in a facility that's not a residential setting. Childcare incubator training cohorts also typically yield additional early childhood educators beyond the number that the incubator space can actually house. And so in the case of New Britain and some of our other communities, this has also created the opportunity to train educators that can then go fill vacant positions in childcare programs throughout the community. Tracy, you can go to the next slide. So this timeline gives a quick overview of the journey that got us to this place. So back in 2017, Tracy and a team of community members in New Britain thought of this idea to create a childcare business incubator. And throughout that process, it became clear that the model would ultimately require modification of licensing regulations that would require state legislation. And so advocacy efforts began in 2018 and continued through 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic stalled efforts. The issue gained momentum again in 2021, and a pilot was established through state legislation that enabled incubators to exist in 7 different communities throughout the state. And there was a limit to 1 incubator per community. So it was really a limited pilot at that time. But this created the opportunity for New Britain to begin its recruiting its training cohort and begin planning for implementation. And so that started in 2022. And as I mentioned, this was when the Connecticut project was connected to Tracy and the team, and was able to invest in the implementation of the New Britain Childcare Incubator. As New Britain was getting, I'm sorry, Tracy, I'm still on the timeline. As New Britain was getting underway, we also, the Connecticut project also started to reach out to the 6 other communities that were included in the pilot legislation, to see if we could identify organizations in those communities that were interested in exploring the possibility of launching a childcare incubator in their community. Through these efforts, we also established a statewide community of practice with representation from all of the 7 communities that were included in the pilot. The ability to identify interested organizations in each of these communities was key to our next phase of advocacy work, which we launched in 2023. And during the 2024 legislative session, we were able to make the case to expand and extend the pilot legislation. So now that it is open to any community in the state, and there is no limit to the number of incubators that can exist in any one town. The 2024 legislation also lifted the sunset date, so really moved it from pilot to full statewide implementation. And I'm excited to share that the second childcare incubator in Connecticut launched in Waterbury last year, and their first training cohort will graduate on May 14th. Now you can do the next slide, Tracy. So this is a map of the communities in Connecticut that are engaged in implementing or planning for the launch of childcare incubators. There are 2 communities, as I mentioned, that are operational. That's New Britain and Waterbury. There are 5 that are actively engaged in planning processes. That's Hartford, New Haven, the broader region of southeastern Connecticut, Bridgeport, and Stamford. And there's 1 community, Danbury, that engaged in a robust planning effort, but are stalled right now because they're facing challenges identifying a suitable location to house the incubator. I will now pass it over to Tracy, who will go into greater detail on the New Britain model and the journey that they've taken.
Well, thanks, Courtney. And for folks who are not familiar with New Britain, as I said, we're located in central Connecticut. We are a small industrial city with a population of just more than 70,000 people, and the average family income in our community is about $50,000, which is about half that for the overall state population. And more than 65% of our residents are renters, so that's the context in which we're operating. But the concept for the incubator was developed in response to the serious shortage of infant toddler care in New Britain. And as you can see from this slide, for every 100 infants and toddlers who would benefit from care in New Britain, there were only 11 slots available. So really forcing many families into either unlicensed care or onto waiting lists, or moms had to wait to work until they could find care. So a collaborative of early childhood serving agencies were working together to address this issue. And then we recognized that family child care for that age group might be more cost effective to address the shortage, and thought about offering a more traditional family child care training project. But as we began talking to women who were interested in being trained, there were other barriers that became apparent. And one of the biggest was a barrier to start and to house a family childcare business with so many renters in our community, landlords needed to give permission, and many were not willing to have a business operate out of their building. So the other things included lack of capital to start a business, and just the sheer complexity of navigating licensing proved to be a barrier too. So when we first started talking about it, it was very clear to us that a traditional training program was not going to work here in New Britain, and that we had to consider a shared space model. And as we began talking about the business incubator type concept and a shared space model, the YWCA, because of our leadership in this effort, was asked to become the lead for this particular project. So, and what does an incubator look like? Once given the go-ahead, we had to find a space, and this, as Courtney mentioned, is a critical piece. You need to have something that will allow multiple rooms converted into childcare settings. And we were able to partner with our housing authority and have used a former adult education and training site with each classroom set up as an independent business, an independent license, independent insurance. It's an independent LLC operating out of the same building. And we have 4 classrooms that look like the picture on the right. And then we have a 5th classroom, which is our gross motor room, that's shared by the women who use it. And that's the picture on the left. We had talked to other folks, churches and school buildings that might be possible locations, but none of those proved to be workable. So the housing authority really was the best fit for us. The OEC, which our Office of Early Childhood is our regulation entity in Connecticut, does require that each one of these businesses operates separately. So we have both an outdoor playground and this gross motor space. So staff, the women can't combine their businesses, they can't combine their groups. They have to use each space independently. They can't share children. In many ways it is, although they're in a shared space, they're functioning very independently of one another. One thing you'll notice in this picture on the left is we do not have bathrooms in every classroom, and that was because the housing authority did not want us to install bathrooms. They didn't want to have to uninstall bathrooms if we ever chose to move out. So we had to convert a nearby office space to a bathroom. And when we did that, OEC required that we have enough staff to support our providers. So we have both a very highly skilled and experienced coordinator and an assistant who assist our providers. Our coordinator does training as well as many of the other things, but the assistant primarily helps and steps into rooms if children need toileting. So that's something for folks to think about when looking at sites. So when we chose our participants, our coordinator, once she was hired, was responsible for developing the early childhood portion of our training. It was a 5-month training. She was also responsible for outreach to recruit 10 participants. That is what we thought we would need to have 4 incubator participants in the end. We reached out to the community via tabling at community events, going to churches, using social media, and doing presentations for adult education programs in our city. Our provider, or our coordinator, is bilingual and bicultural Spanish speaking, which was important in the context of our community as well. So candidates who were interested went both through an application and interview process. They had to commit to the full course of the training and include consistent attendance, and references were also required. And the early childhood portion of our training included topics like classroom management, lesson planning, curriculum development, child development, children's assessments, food prep, and licensing. And we looked for partners for the financial literacy and business operations portion of the training. Initially, we partnered with a bank, but it proved to be the wrong fit as their curriculum was too advanced for our participants. But our state had another nonprofit, the Women's Business and Development Council, who had been given a grant by the Office of Early Childhood to support family childcare businesses. We approached them about a partnership, and they have ended up being our financial literacy trainer. They've also provided business coaches to each of our participants and a startup grant that supported purchase of a laptop and the first year subscription for a software management program. So we did find that some participants did find the course more than they were ready for. So 8 of the 10 completed the course. And one of our graduates decided that owning her own business in the end was not what she wanted to do. So she has since become a YWCA childcare employee. 2 of the graduates were able to set up businesses in their own homes. And we were able to support them through the licensing process. And then the 4 final participants participated in an interview process with the selection committee and became the chosen providers for our incubator. And you can see them pictured here. On the left are the 4 providers, and on the right is Carla specifically in her classroom. And then in terms of moving forward, in general, I do recommend partnering with others in the community when components are beyond your own capacity or experience. And moving forward, we are beginning to think about the transition out of the incubator. The agreement is to allow them to work in the shared space for 3 to 5 years to get their business started and to amass the capital they need to transition. However, we do recognize there may be other opportunities that appear prior to that time. So one, we've approached the Housing Authority about space usage for one of our providers who lives in public housing to see if she can transition into a community center space there. Unfortunately, the housing in public housing complexes won't let her operate out of a housing unit, but perhaps out of a community center space may be possible. In addition, we partnered with another nonprofit, which is a NeighborWorks affiliate, whose experience is working with first-time low-income home buyers, assisting them with the purchase of their home. And what you see here is their first foray into purchasing a property in New Britain, in a portion of New Britain that would be considered a childcare desert, and with renovations that they plan to convert it to a family childcare business. So we have one of our providers going through the preparation process to become a home buyer in terms of improving credit and amassing what she needs to for this portion of the project. So our goal is really to seed family childcare businesses in neighborhoods around New Britain, and really to grow the access to care. So that's my presentation. The last slide, and I'm sure you'll get the slides afterwards, but the last slide has both Courtney and my email addresses. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, but we're happy to take any questions or discuss any aspect of this at this point.
Thank you both so much, Tracy and Courtney. That was a great presentation. So we'd love to just open up the conversation now. So really the rest of this session is for us all to engage in conversation. So please use the chat. Feel free to come off mute or raise your hand. We can read things aloud from the chat, but we will hand it off to you all to see what questions have been sparked by this conversation.
I have a question, just really thinking about in the example you shared. So they're all unique businesses in a shared space.
Sorry,
How did they
Jillian,
do?
can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm Jillian Ritter. I work for Child Care Aware of America. And so we have had a workforce project that we've been actually partnering with LISC on. So we've gotten to know them, and we are just kind of getting into the community and economic development space with that. So my question is really about meal prep and food service and how that works with that shared space. If there's a kitchen, if they all do it independently.
So yes, they all do it independently. Ironically, part of this has been about breaking barriers to structural barriers. And one of those barriers actually ends up being the CACFP program. Because they're family child care providers, they're not centers, and they're not based in their homes, they're not eligible for CACFP reimbursement funding, but we don't have kitchens per se in any of the rooms. We do have microwaves and refrigerators. So we do ask, and the providers ask the parents bring their lunches or their regular meals. The providers themselves provide the snacks, but the meals are provided by parents because we don't have that capacity, at least in this space.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And just to raise up, we did have a kudos in the chat about just Jessica saying what a way to think outside the box, expand access to care, and great work with your housing authority partnership there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I think that's really an important part of this is finding collaborations that work. This model, I would like to say, is only 10% publicly funded. So the rest of the 90% of the funding comes from private sources like the Connecticut Project, like the Fund for Greater Hartford, and Kim is on this call as well. And so most of our funding is coming from private sources that have to be renewed annually. We do receive some community development block grant funding from our city. That's how they partner with us. We are an intermediary. Our providers are actually, Connecticut has state included family child care and their state funded programs. And so we act as the support so that our 4 providers can access that state funding. It means they can offer childcare on a sliding fee scale to parents in our community. As I said, because of the income levels, that's very important. And they also get the Care for Kids funding. If parents are eligible for us, Care for Kids is our child care subsidy program in Connecticut. Of course, some of these funding sources come out of the social service block grant, which is federal funding, which is a different issue that we may be facing in the future. But at this point in time, Connecticut is as a state, is very supportive of childcare and is looking to expand it rather than contract the system.
Tracy, I'm glad you brought up funding. As Tracy mentioned, the incubators are effective at supporting providers to apply for state-funded contracted slots, which is great. So that's creating more affordable slots, and ideally, as we as a state shift toward more contracted funding, sustained funding streams for programs. And there is not currently funding in our state budget to support the operation of the incubator itself, of the, the training, of the staffing that's required. In addition to the funding that Tracy mentioned, the Waterbury Incubator was able to access a facilities grant through the LISC Child Care Facilities Fund that was created through ARPA funding. But that was one-time funding for the renovation of their space. And so I think that the next frontier of our advocacy efforts is around identifying sustained state funding to support workforce development programs in the early childhood space, and the incubators being a main source of that.
On the advocacy point that you just made, I'm wondering that CACFP sticking point there, is there any thoughts about how you could sort of lift up this innovation? And I know CACFP can be a challenge for home-based providers to begin with. And then, when we come across constraints like this, I think there's, unintended consequences to some of the
Sure.
regulations.
I mean, certainly we're not a stranger to advocacy. We had to advocate for this model to go forward from the very beginning, and that took a period of time. We have reached out, and Nicole Villanueva, who's my incubator coordinators on this call, but we have reached out to CACFP and have been talking to them, and as well as talking to the family child care accreditation bodies. A number of the organizations don't look at this and don't look at us as a traditional family child care organization and structure. So we are having to navigate some of these particular challenges with some of their staff. We've started those conversations. We haven't yet reached resolution, but those conversations have begun. I'm hopeful when there are more of us, it'll make it a little easier.
Well, we did have a few questions come in with our registration, so I will pull up one of those right now. I know you spoke to this a little bit, and Nicole, the coordinator, is on the call, but how do you staff a childcare incubator?
So, we have up to 2 positions, and as I said, we because we don't have bathrooms in our actual classrooms and children may be toilet training, it does require that the providers leave their space. And so we needed to have and demonstrate to the Office of Early Childhood when we got licensed that we had the staffing to do that. So, we also have a goal to increase our supports to other family childcare providers in our community. So that is Nicole's role. She was the trainer. She developed the training for our family childcare training project. She also provides coaching. As state funded providers, our providers have to also undergo assessment through the FAKERS assessments for family child care, and so she does the prep for that so that the providers know what's coming and are ready. 3 of our providers had to begin the process of getting their child development associate credential. So Nicole helped coordinate that and so that they would move on to get their training and navigate that successfully. And then we've started, and Nicole started to pull the greater family child care community together. So they can come into the center for other types of trainings that we may be running for the 4 providers in our incubator, but they are just as appropriate for independent providers in their home. And we're getting requests now that we are up and running and providers out in the community see what's going on. They're actually coming to Nicole and asking her for supports, either to come in and observe and give feedback or to troubleshoot an issue, what have you. So we're starting to become that hub, that support service that we had envisioned for this family childcare community.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Courtney.
I was gonna say, Bevan asked a good question in the chat, which was about the does the coordinator work for the Y? And so yes, in the case of both New Britain and in Waterbury, where they also have a coordinator, the backbone organization in Waterbury is the YMCA of Waterbury. And they're staff members of the YWCA in New Britain and the YMCA in Waterbury.
Right.
And so that is one of the I think biggest piece components of the budget that of the operating the incubator, and what again we'd hope would be paid for through ideally public funding sometime in the future.
Mhm.
And one other question for the assistant who floats for the toileting. Are they also staffed through the like, I'm just curious how the licensing works and if that was problematic and
Yeah.
hard to get.
Well, licensing went through several iterations,
I bet.
Bevan. Yeah, so when the state first decided, the legislation passed and said, yes, you could do this as a pilot, it was recognized we were going to be kind of building this plane as we were flying it. And so, we from the very beginning had licensing. Once we chose a space, we had licensing come in to look at it. We had the fire marshal come in to look at it, because even though in a family child care setting in Connecticut, you don't involve the fire marshal, you may not involve city health, but in center-based programming, you do. You have to go to building and zoning and those kinds of things. And because this is a hybrid, the licensing said, yes, you have to go. That part is going to be licensed. And initially, it was going to have to be part licensed by the Y and then part licensed by the provider. But after many discussions with licensing, it is settled out that the providers all get their independent licenses and they're all submitting the same facility information, for the incubator. So the common information goes in their applications, but they're all submitting independent licensing applications. And so they all have independent licenses, independent license numbers. And, in some ways that is why licensing said you have to operate independently because of a liability standpoint. If something comes up, licensing has to be, licensing has to understand who was responsible for a particular child at the time. So they can't share children, they can't share operations, they can't share any of the facilities. They have to take turns in using common spaces and operate very independently of one another.
And that license, that once they kind of transition out of that shared space, did they kind of re-get their license?
They'll have to go through the licensing process again, because they'll be in a separate and a different space, and probably likely a very different space than the one they're occupying with us.
We do have a couple of questions coming in the chat, so I will just read through this. One question from Rachel, who is curious about the facility's co-location partnerships and how the settings were chosen. What was it about the housing authority that made it a best fit in New Britain?
Really, we were looking for a building that had separate classrooms, multiple classrooms in one building. So we had originally approached the school district which had empty classrooms, and this was prior to COVID. But then COVID hit and they were reducing class sizes and moving things around. So after COVID, they didn't have the ability to house us. So then we went to church. Many churches have, Sunday school classrooms. So we were looking at that kind of configuration, but the churches we found were not interested necessarily in giving up their space solely for this particular project, or they were concerned about the liability of it. So that didn't work either. It just so happened in New Britain that this space was an empty space. It had been built in 2015. It had remained empty for a period of time because the partners that developed it, the partnership fell apart. And so it was being really underutilized. I was familiar with it because we used it for community meetings and that kind of thing. And so I approached the housing authority about, this is a different usage. It's still training, education and training, adult job training, which is what the site was built for. So they agreed, and we were able to move on with that. Cost is also a thing. We do pay them rent, so it benefits the housing authority to have us in the building as well. But that is the one thing. You have to have the right space for this type of thing. I am aware of another group that had this is not in Connecticut, but a similar model. They're doing a similar thing, and they're using an old childcare center as being that went offline during COVID, was not able to come back. So that's another thought or idea. If there is a space in your community that had been used for childcare and is no longer used for that purpose, but is available, it could be another option.
Yeah, and in other communities in Connecticut, so in Waterbury, they have renovated classrooms in the Waterbury Youth Services Building. So my understanding is that was also an underutilized building that was mostly used for like after school programming. They were able to take 2 of the classrooms, renovate them for childcare, and then the youth services programs are still operated on like the other side of the building. In New Haven, they are going to rent space from a church. As Tracy mentioned, another challenge some of our partner organizations have run into around church space is the availability of the space during like extended hours. So sometimes it's like a really great space, but the providers can only access it between 9 and 5. And a lot of, programs need to open earlier or remain open later so that they can really better accommodate parents' working schedules. In Bridgeport, they are utilizing the backbone organization is the Community Action Agency in Bridgeport. They operate a lot of childcare programs, primarily through Head Start, and have vacant classrooms due to staffing challenges. And so they were looking for a way to utilize those spaces and also create a pipeline for educators that could work, in their childcare programs. So they're going to open their incubator classrooms in several classrooms that are not being used by the Community Action Agency's Head Start programs right now.
Mm-hmm. We were also approached by an organization that is a university. And a university was considering converting space on campus for this type of project. So there really isn't a limit in terms of who you find as a partner, an appropriate partner, when it comes to this type of space.
Just speaking on a little bit more on the partnerships, I know we kind of talked a little bit before this conversation, and you all had mentioned like some of the partnerships might look a little bit different. Like, for example, New Britain and Waterbury, there are some kind of common elements necessary for success. Just wondering if you could kind of speak to, those assets and, what you're looking for.
Yeah, Tracy, do you want me to jump in and then you can
Sure,
share if I leave
Yep.
anything out? So we did spend a good amount of time reflecting on this, both through New Britain's process and to help inform the planning efforts in other communities. And so some of the things that emerged, number one, having a backbone organization that's able to house the incubator is critical. And what is interesting, with the exception of New Britain, the entity that took on the planning work didn't ultimately result in being the entity that's going to lead the implementation of the incubator as the backbone organization. So, for example, we've had a number of different cradle to career, like collective impact entities take on the planning work because they were well positioned to pull organizations from throughout the community together to explore the possibility of launching an incubator. And at the end of the day, the organization that ultimately seemed best poised to implement the incubator tended to be an organization that had deep expertise in early childhood education. So knowledge of state and local systems, funding streams, program operation, that they had, committed leadership at the individual and institutional level. They, were able to maintain those relationships with local community organizations that came together for the planning. They were, committed to increasing access to high quality, affordable childcare. They were able to put together a staffing plan, had fundraising experience, had knowledge in facilities, renovation and management. They had connections with community leaders, funders, policymakers. Were able to continue to facilitate a community-wide advisory committee. They were willing to be innovative, and were able to put together a training plan that addressed the various assets needed for those interested in launching their own business. So the child development aspects, this small business development aspects, the licensing, and all of the kind of, attaining of the necessary licensing and permits. And those training partnerships, I think, don't all necessarily, or that training doesn't all necessarily have to happen from the backbone organization, but at least an awareness of what resources exist so that you can leverage existing training models that we have throughout the state. So yeah, Tracy, anything you would add to that?
No, I think that was a pretty comprehensive answer, Courtney.
Well, we do have a few more minutes. Thank you guys so much. Again, this is really amazing, and thank you for everyone for participating. Before Regina kind of closes out this meeting, just want to see what other questions we might have here. And I don't think I ever said, but we will be sharing out the information from this meeting after. So keep a lookout. And it is a series, so keep an eye out for our future sessions as well. And we have a question. Have you all been approached by other states and communities interested in following in your footsteps? From Rachel.
The answer, Rachel, is yes. We've had visited, we've been visited by groups from Minnesota and Rhode Island and Massachusetts. We've spoken to groups in New Jersey and Nebraska and Kansas. So really wide variety across the country that who have been interested in finding out more about how we started this, how to move forward, and looking at this model for their area.
Awesome, thank you.
We have done work to put together a toolkit, which we're not sharing incredibly broadly because I think it's really important to understand that this toolkit was put together in a Connecticut context. And, this model is going to look different in other states depending on your licensing regulations, how, whoever oversees licensing for your state decides to approach this model. That said, if you are interested in seeing it, you can reach out to me and I can directly share a copy. We also have put together a report that documents the timeline and journey that Tracy and her team have taken in New Britain. And so, if you email me, I can share that directly with you as well.
I was just gonna ask quickly, it sounds like I mean, there's a lot of challenges, but the initial ability for licensing and regulation to even contemplate this was a huge, like, step in the right direction that allowed for the flexibility. And it sounds like the recognition of folks that you were sort of doing and learning at the same time made it really possible. So that partnership with OEC and other folks was really critical to make this work.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there were, we made mistakes too. There were folks that
Right.
we should have involved. The building department for was one, we were able to course correct. And then there were also, when working with licensing, there were changes in their viewpoint too along the way. Oh, we should do it this way. No, 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 we should do it this way. So sometimes the requirements at the state level changed as we were going along. So you had to be somewhat flexible. I would hope at this point, because we've been through the whole process, and licensing has been through the whole process with us, that other communities are not going to have
Yeah.
quite the challenge that we did as the startup, but it does require, particularly if you're in a particular state or a particular area, and this becomes the first one, you have to be prepared for some of that.
My next question was just gonna be if any of the lessons learned have been memorialized in updated regulation, for the incubators specifically, or how they're sort of managing that process.
Yeah, they definitely have created a licensing packet now for incubator participants, which they didn't have when we first started this, and so that did take some time too. But yes, and as I said before, originally when they were talking about licensing, they originally told us we would have to license the site, the providers would license their business, and then scrap that idea completely. And so things have changed along the way, and yes, the licensing guidelines at this point, I think everybody in OEC and many of their licensors have visited the site too. And Nicole has a great connection to them as well. And as we were going along, she made sure she was meeting with them on a regular basis. And if there was any questions about anything that we had been told by them, there was multiple conversations about it. But each one of our licensors or each one of our providers has a different licensor. So that's another thing that helps keep, I guess, licensing organized about, how they interact with each one of the providers too. So it's been an interesting process, but yes, the licensing at this point is pretty established, I think.
Yeah, and unfortunately on the zoning, building, fire inspector, that falls at more of a local level. And so depending on the community that you're in, you might be faced with different challenges. Certainly in spaces that have previously been used as childcare, the path forward seems a little bit more clear. But this is again where I think having a backbone organization that is currently operating childcare, even if it's in another building, there's just like a knowledge of how to navigate that process and who to reach out to, that seems to really help accelerate
Mhm.
those permits as well.
Yeah, and it really helped. It really helped bringing in not only the state licensing, but the city officials to the space, just to do a walkthrough when we first looked at the space to say, is this possible? Is this, if we looked at, these classrooms or these particular parts of the building, what are your thoughts on what needs to be changed or modified to make this a possible incubator site. It really helped clarify. And also because our fire marshal was not, he had never dealt with family child care. So suddenly he's dealing with regulations that he was not overly familiar with. So getting the health department and the fire marshal in for that kind of discussion as well made it go a lot more smoothly.
Did you have to sprinkler the whole space?
It was already,
It was,
it's
okay.
already sprinkler. I mean, that was the nice thing about using a space that was relatively new. We didn't have to worry about the sprinklers.
It's a good question, Bevan. I don't know about the other facilities. I'm not sure. I feel like maybe Waterbury was already sprinkled too, but I can.
That's a
follow up.
huge cost.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, everyone. I really want to say thank you to Tracy and Courtney for sharing your incredible work with us today. At any time, if anyone have any questions for Tracy and Courtney, please send us an email. Just, how I was feeling. I was struck by how the child care incubator for businesses is forging new partnerships to better meet the needs of both the provider and the family. The thoughtful approach of breaking barriers, finding collaborations that work, to mapping key elements and assets along the participant's pathway is not only innovative, but is also deeply inspiring. I'm sure everyone value how exciting it is to witness such a forward-thinking strategy putting into action in real time. I mean, thank you, Tracy and Courtney, for your expertise. We appreciate it. We'll be sending a follow-up email shortly with today's slide deck and Tracy and Courtney's contact information. But as we continue planning future sessions in the series, we'd love to hear from you, your feedback, your suggestions, anything you would like to see going forward. Your input help us ensure that these gatherings are meaningful and relevant. Once again, thank you for making space in your busy schedule. I know everybody is busy to be with us today. So as Megan said, we will look forward to seeing you at future sessions. So stay tuned and we'll be sending out topics for the future sessions.